Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Humanities, SOH. Diploma in Creative Writing in English, DCE. DCE 03 Short Story. Block-1 Basic Elements of a Short Story. Unit-3 Character. 3.0 Aims and Objectives. This unit aims at providing you with the notion of characterization in the short story, its significance, its relationship to plot, its place in the atmosphere of the story, etc. You will be told how to choose characters and how to develop them during the course of a short narrative. You will also learn how to avoid certain pitfalls in the creation and treatment of characters, especially because characterization in a short story is quite different from that in a full-length novel. 3.1 Introduction. In the preceding two units you were told about A. Plot structure and B. Atmosphere in the short story. The present unit deals with another important element, namely, characterization. A short story is basically a story of the human condition as the writer sees it. Consequently, it has to have human characters, apart from the events that happen to them. Thus, it is important for you, as a storyteller, to choose your characters with care. Times develop them in harmonious interaction with the events, and times maximize the impression they create at the point of climax, so that you may achieve the best results with your story. 3.2 Choosing characters. When planning a story, at what stage does one start thinking about its characters? The question resolves into a consideration of what comes first at the conceptual stage: the plot, i.e., the total framework, or the characters, who are but a component of the plot. This is largely a matter of strategy. In a conventional short story, it would be useful to lay down the structure first, as it is the turn of events that provides the result, and then summon the characters. But if the result consists in the surprise provided by the twists or turnabouts of the characters, or in an essentially intellectual or psychological revelation, it would be better to choose the characters carefully before setting out the plot. This is because the mental equipment and conditioning of the characters is relatively more important than the situations they are required to handle. In choosing your characters, you have to bear in mind that there is hardly any place in a short story, as distinguished from a novel, where a character is not called upon to make a substantial contribution to the interplay referred to above, but is allowed merely to add to the atmosphere or the scenario. The smaller canvas of the short story does not allow you the luxury of such cosmetics. On the other hand, there is real danger in having such extraneous or hedgy, albeit interesting, characters loiter about in your story, and they tend to diffuse their focus, which is fatal to the result you wish to achieve. It should be remembered that in a short story, unlike in a novel, there is scope for only one peak, not an undulating range of mountains, howsoever beautiful it may be, a single flash of illumination and not an array of lights. That is the limitation, or rather distinctive merit, of a short story: a sharp and visible unity of impression. This you should exercise utmost economy in the number of characters you choose for a story, and so you should choose only such characters as you I can visualize in fairly clear dimensions right at the start, or A are confident of making whole and full-bodied during the course of the story. 3.3 Parameters to be observed in the choice of characters. The parameters you will do well to adopt in the choosing of characters are, however, common to all fiction, novels or short stories, and would lead you to formulate answers to the following questions, among others. 3rd March 2001 Do you know your characters? You must know the likes of them, so that you may write about them in realistic detail, and articulate their thoughts. They must be credible to you, before you can expect your readers to fall for them as real. William Faulkner had said that experience, observation, and imagination are the three sources you have to draw upon for your fiction, and the deficiency in one can be made up by generous supplies from the rest. But this is not to say that you can depend on your imagination to substitute entirely for experience and observation. A balanced use of material is always to be preferred for any construction. So you should recall the men and women within your knowledge, and see if one or more can fit in with a general idea of the plot and whether they react in a manner which suits the purpose of your story. You need not look for exact prototypes, unless, of course, the story itself is suggested by a vastly interesting character you know in real life. More often than not, it would be convenient to create a living collage, the facial expressions of A combined with the social habits of B and the philosophical outlook of C, and this present a character, both familiar and fascinating. And insofar as central characters are concerned, you should not fight shy of projecting a bit of your own personality to into him/her for the best results. It will seep through anyway if you are not insincere in your storytelling. However, the general proposition in this paragraph needs to be modified to take care of a few variables and clarify some legitimate doubts. These are brought out below. You need not know each of your characters sufficiently well in a story that demands more than one character. There may be a case for introducing exotica to claim the greater attention of the reader. You may also be tempted to mystify or amuse the reader with the quality of strangeness in a character. In that case, the central character protagonist, who could also be the narrator in the first person, should at least be one with whom you are sufficiently familiar so that his experiences may appear plausible. Characters from a different milieu. For reasons of social motivation, you may sometimes feel compelled to choose characters from a totally different milieu. The confirmed urbanite may wish to write about rural people, an affluent businessman, smitten with sympathy or remorse for the slum dwellers, may wish to write about him, and so forth. But any brave and admirable intentions of writing stories, well removed from a familiar socio-economic, and hence cultural, milieu, must be matched by the efforts you have made to know them at first hand, just as George Orwell lived the life of vagrants for quite some time before he wrote his novel Down and Out in Paris and London, or Gopinath Mohanty lived with Adivasis in the jungles of Koraput before he wrote his award-winning book, Anuruddha Santana. Otherwise, you run the danger of patronizing your chosen characters or romanticizing their lives, which would make them less real. Characters in myths and legends. What about fantasies, or stories woven round myths or legends? As regards fantasies, the characters must necessarily be incredible, in a facile sense. But unless they are written entirely for children, the apparent nonsense must make sense by being in purposeful juxtaposition to the real. Like Goya's paintings, you may deliberately distort reality, so as to provoke in the reader a certain awareness of the realities that he tends to ignore. But such demons and fairies that you may create must relate intrinsically to recognizable modes of human thought and behavior. In this context, you may recall Swift's Gulliver's Travels, or clever parables designed to hold the interest of children and adults alike, at different levels, like Alice in Wonderland. Insofar as myths and legends, other than fantasies, are concerned, the characters are expected, no doubt, to be larger than life. But you are advised not to stray too far away from recognizable reality, so that the resemblance to characters in real life is not entirely lost, and the purpose of pointing a moral or adoring a tale, as is usual in adopting such devices, is not defeated. Natural phenomena as characters. Coach, you have an object of nature such as a river or a mountain as the central character in a story. Yes. In the nature of a fable, when it can be entirely humanized, or 2. As a constant backdrop, or a recurrent witness, to the movement in the story, so much so that it may appear to be the central character in empathy with the human condition, yet standing out in its separateness, thus lending a cosmic grandeur to the content of the story. However, you will realize that a sharp and fluid movement in a short story does not ordinarily admit of the ambition as at 2, and hence you should not undertake it without mapping out the sequence carefully in advance, so that the interplay between the nature character and others does not appear to be heavy and artificial. Here you may recall the river stairs in Rabindranath Tagore's short story of the same name. 3rd March 2002. Does the reader know them? While it is important that you should know your characters, you should not ignore the consideration that they should not also be entirely unfamiliar to your target audience. In other words, ways of life and thought should not be alien to the sympathies and perceptions of those you want to reach. For example, a writer has to think twice before choosing characters from the Scandinavian society, with whom he is very familiar, when he has to communicate largely due to the compulsions of logistics or language with rural or semi-urban readership in India. But he need have no such fears if his readers are from the metropolitan cities, who are expected to be fairly familiar with the ways of people in foreign lands. 3rd March 2003. Do you like them? The word like is being used here in its widest connotation. As a writer of fiction, you are no doubt obliged to distance yourself from your characters and then enter into the personality of each, making him play his assigned role in the story. At the same time, you have to have a broad sympathy with your characters, good or bad, ugly or beautiful, so that at no point of time are you constrained, in spite of yourself, to withdraw from the self-appointed task of making the character come through comprehensively and in his most natural and authentic colors. For example, you are tempted to choose a character in charge of the burning of bodies in the village cremation ground. You may be familiar with what he does in general terms, but are you confident that you can do justice to the nauseating spread of his work, the things he has to do to the decayed suppurating flesh of a human being? The same goes for characters who are required to perform extreme indecencies of sex or violence. In this connection, you may go through such a Tantra story, Flowers Are Not for Burning, translated from his Oriya original, Mashani Rafula, which appears in Modern Indian Short Stories Vol. 4 published by ICCR. You will be amazed by the wealth of detail, revolting yet fascinating, that goes into his story built around the theme of how the body of a young unwed mother is burnt by the veteran and rapacious cremation man, who too falters for a while in his job. The distinguished writer does make the reader react in great pity and horror the way he would have wished. But it makes you wonder whether you can possibly write similarly on a semi-theme unless, of course, you are able to attain such an extraordinary height of artistic detachment. 3.4 Developing the characters. You have now arrived at the take-off stage and you have formulated certain aims and hopes for your story, perhaps to amuse, shock, charm or educate your fellow beings, or just to make them sit up and think. The barest outline of a plot and the general appearance and disposition of the characters who will have to interact with the events towards the fulfillment of your aims have been laid down. Talking of characters, you have, in fact, done no more than selected the ones wholesale or in bits and pieces who could help you, and you have satisfied yourself generally that they ought to be credible and acceptable to your readers. You have now to write out your story, and in the process, develop the characters so that their potentials are realized. 3rd April 2001. Do they have to be characters? This is not a frivolous question. You have chosen prototypes, collages or combinations of real-life persons for your characters. Now do you want them to behave just as you want them to behave, just as people do in real life, and to think just as you would imagine such people to think. Your initial reaction would be, of course, yes. How else can this story be realistic? But it is a paradox that in fiction a totally faithful representation of real-life individuals would not only make them much too dull, ordinary and inconsistent as most of us are, but unrealistic. This is so because the readers would like to apprehend that reality which is not perceived by them in their ordinary lives. This is what Shakespeare's Hamlet meant when he said that drama holds the mirror up to life. In other words, the readers want to discover reality. There is no point, otherwise, in their stepping outside their daily lives into the land of fiction. No stereotypes. No character should appear to be a stereotype of other such characters in fiction. This it would be a mistake to attempt creating another Sherlock Holmes in detective fiction, a Don Quixote in social satire, or a Heathcliff in the literature of high romance. Imitations, however good, are at a heavy discount in literature. Keep them ordinary and typical. The characters may stay ordinary, even typical, where the story attempts to deal with events of extraordinary historical significance, such as war, famine, etc. For, in such stories, the enormity of the events is of primary importance and should not be diluted and sidetracked by the interest created by characters, unless, of course, you wish to show how heroes are molded out of common clay thanks to the impact of such extraordinary events. No archetypes. The license to create characters, or characterization, as the term applies to fiction, does not permit you as a modern storyteller to inflict archetypes, models of virtue or vice, dolls or demons of thoughtless sentiment, and such objects, on the intelligent reader. In other words, you should develop your characters in such a way that your reader is induced to believe that the out of the ordinary trait in the character is but an interesting tilt of the commonplace, and the climaxing revelation is but the possibility that is ingrained in each one of us. A comforting thought, for which he would be thankful to the writer. 3rd April 2002. The growth of characters. Where do they go from here? Obviously, a plot denotes movement in time and space, and when the characters are but actors in the plot, they cannot remain static. But the movement appropriate to a character goes beyond the time-space dimensions. Any character, howsoever well conceived, would appear to be wooden and static if he just moved along with the demands of the plot and reacted predictably. It is essential that he must grow, and seem to grow. That is, his personality must unfold itself in the process of his thoughts and action, so that he reveals himself fully, and often surprisingly, only at the end of the story. Consistent as he may be on the whole, as a character distinguished from an average man in the street, you should subject him to the pains of growing up, and make him go through a measure of inconsistencies, anxieties, contradictions, etc., revealing new facets of his character each time he deals with a situation. You should make such unfolding possible even within the smaller canvas of a conventional short story. However, take care to see that the pace is not too uneven. This. You should not allow the character to play all his aces right at the beginning, and you should ensure that the surprise of a revelation at the end is not such as would seem totally out of character, and hence unbelievable. A clever storyteller should maintain an even flow in developing his character in such a way that the reader's interest is not only sustained all through, but an element of suspense is also built into his absorption, so that the revelation at the end appears to be quite logical and yet eminently satisfying as a surprise. A special mention needs to be made regarding the place of thought, as distinguished from action, in the development of a character. Theoretically, there can be no objection to the substitution of thought for action in a short story. On the other hand, there has been an increasing emphasis on thought at the expense of action in modern storytelling, subscribing to the theory that nothing of importance happens in the world except in the mind. Thus, long stretches of thought, which were common only to novels in the earlier days, have come to invade short stories too, and these are sometimes in the nature of streams of consciousness, not yet formulated into coherent thought expressed in complete and logical sentences. Activity 2. In the limited space available in a short story, is there room for developing a character? If so, how can it be done? 50 words. Check your answer with that given at the end of the unit. 3rd April 2003. The writer speaks through the characters. Howsoever real and formidable the characters may seem to be, the fact remains that they are but creatures of imagination, willed into existence by the author. This genetic circumstance carries with it an unstated obligation, namely, that the characters are expected to voice the worldview of their master and progenitor. True, the writer aims at being objective, and he may well be annoyed at the suggestion that his characters are Trojan horses designed to carry the battle into the enemy's camp by unfair means. But whether he likes it or not, his characters are bound to carry the marks of their parentage, in some way or other. For, after all, there is no such thing as the human condition as a concrete demonstrable fact subject to immutable physical laws. It depends on how you look at it, with the worldview that you have developed over your adult years, as a sensitive and intelligent human being. Thus, the same combination of characters and events may result in a situation that is comic or tragic, trite or serious, and so forth, deriving from the tone, the color and the sympathies that you, as a writer, got into it. In other words, a certain basic emotional coloration to your characters is unavoidable. But you should guard against the temptation to speak through your characters in a manner which would give the impression that they are merely your mouthpieces. 3rd April 2004. All characters need not be treated alike. It is no virtue in the writer of a short story to treat all his characters equally, in a story having more than one character. You should know that some are more equal than others. That is, you should discriminate not only between one and the other among the rest, depending on their relative importance in the story. It is only then that a proper sense of perspective can be achieved. Of course, a writer has got to play favorites for the sake of the story, so that it is both aesthetically satisfying and functionally effective in relation to the central idea of the story. However, this has to be a studied pattern. You should not fall in love with a minor character and linger over, say, the charms of a flower or a courtier while the king and the queen are waiting in the wings. 3rd April 2005. First person narrative. Telling the story in the first person, as if the writer has lived it out himself, has always had a special attraction for the storyteller, for it makes it appear as if the story is the entire truth, and nothing but the truth. And it can be so cleverly told, by using a direct conventional style, that the reader is likely to be taken in by the deception. However, the pretender, normally the central character or the protagonist, is subject to certain infirmities and temptations which have to be taken care of so that the storytelling is not faulted. Times the first person is not omniscient and omnipresent. The writer who keeps himself in the background is free to describe not only the external happenings that each character is involved with, but also what happens in the mind of each. But this is not possible for the first-person narrator. You cannot eat your cake and have it too. You cannot haughty truths of other characters, when you have deliberately reduced the all-pervasive status of the narrator to the first person only, for the sake of greater truthfulness, but this obvious limitation is sometimes lost sight of, and should be guarded against. Times a first-person narrator cannot behave self-consciously. Every person in the world is largely self-righteous. So he tends to rate himself as essentially sane and good, following an exercise in self-analysis, whereas he is apt to be more ruthless and objective when he analyzes others. In obedience to this basic psychological truth, the first-person narrator cannot afford normally to be too harsh to himself, as the reader may find it perverse or pretentious and hence not realistic. The only exception to the requirement is when the writer chooses deliberately to be confessional and vicious, as it were, to confide in the reader. But the confessional mode is appropriate only to a story which is not only character-oriented but where the character is of the intenser kind. Conversely, the first-person narrator cannot afford to glorify himself, except in a light-hearted manner, as if he invites the reader to take it with a pinch of salt. 3.5 The ending. Not all characters need have a memorable exit line. The minor ones may as well slink away after doing their job. But the final result, namely, the impact you would like to create with whatever you have to say on the human condition, depends immeasurably for its success on the famous last lines of the central character protagonist before he leaves the stage. In other words, the way he performs at the point of climax is vitally important for your story. This is determined largely by the plot itself, and also by the style of presentation. But other things being equal, it will be useful to consider here a few guidelines. These are indicated below, taking into account, in particular, the increased sophistication in modern storytelling, in response to the greater complexities of modern life, and a consequent emphasis on intellection. 3rd May 2001 Place of melodrama. The character should not normally leave the stage with a bang, say, in a flood of tears, or uproarious laughter, to underscore the revelation. Here is a melodramatic ending from a novel about the Wild West and cowboys. She went on, "You saved my life. Everything you have done here has been brave and good and right. Without you, admire you. And I don't want you to go. I want you to stay. I need you here with me. Please stay." She stopped, breathless. She had said it very fast, and she wasn't sure how much sense it had made. But she had said it, and now she looked at Six, awaiting and dreading his reaction. The quiet undertones of an expression, with or without a small fact of observation in the external world, like the falling of a leaf or some charming nonsense uttered by a child, as a foil to the importance, or the seeming non-importance, of the occasion, can usually be more effective in doing honor to the revelation granted to him. 3rd May 2002 Extent of revelation. The revelation should not be too revealing. What is provided to the character and, through him, to the reader at large, should be no more than a flash, an opening out to some tantalizing possibilities, though it may masquerade as illumination. The modern intellectual does not take kindly to certitudes, more so on the part of a writer who is not his spiritual mentor. It will be even better if you could work on the reader, and thereby boost his ego, at the cost of the character, making it appear as if you and the reader know the real meaning of the revelation granted to the character, which is unfortunately denied to him. This is what is known as irony, dear to the heart of the modern intellectual, but you should not attempt it unless you are confident that it will register in the mind of the reader as a piece of wisdom, and not a mere play upon words. An example of how austere and yet effective the concluding lines can be in revealing the character without revealing enough, in a tone that makes fun of him on the face of it, but exudes charity and compassion, may be had from a passage from Ernest Hemingway's short story 10 Indians. The hero is Nick, a boy growing into manhood, who has a crush on an Indian girl named Prudence. On a certain 4th of July, American Independence Day, Nick happens to be driving home from town with some neighbors in their horse wagon, and gets to talking with them about Indians, including Indian girls. He is teased about his relationship with Prudence, which he denies. But at the end of the day, and on reaching home, he learns from his father that his girl was enjoying herself with one of the drunk Indians, whom he had come across during his drive in the vegan site, which, in fact, had started the entire conversation. This naturally breaks his heart. But how very heartbroken can a boy be allowed to be, and for how long? Even the wind and waves of nature seem to take a hand in the proceedings. The passage runs as follows. Nick went into his room, undressed and got into bed. He heard his father moving around in the living room. Nick lay in the bed with his face in the pillow. My heart is broken. He thought, if I feel this way, my heart must be broken. After a while, he heard his father blow out the lamp and go into his own room. He heard a wind come up in the trees outside and felt it come in cool through the screen. He lay for a long time with his face in the pillow, and after a while he forgot to think about Prudence and finally he went to sleep. In the morning there was a big wind blowing and he was awake a long time before he remembered that his heart was broken. 3.67 Yippee. Though there isn't enough room in this short story for an elaborate delineation of character, yet character is one of its most important elements. In fact, a short story be built entirely round a character. Me, times choosing a character is, of course, the primary task. The writer must show that he knows his characters intimately. Times, despite the limited scope of the short story, characters can be shown to develop. Times, all characters need not be treated alike. Times, the treatment of characters is different in the first-person narrative from the other types of narrative. The ending of this short story, without being melodramatic or too revealing, can be used for character portrayal. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.